We are live.
Okay, we are live. Joint hearing. And we've Senate Finance and I'm gonna let you.
Great. Yep, I'm Representative Kathleen James, Chair of the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. And you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Sure. Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, Vice Chair of the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee.
Laura Spilia. Two.
Graham Klebner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
You want to start here, Tom?
Sure, Tom Chittenden, I represent the southeast area of Chittenden County.
Good afternoon. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
Scott Peck, Caledonia District. Randy Grock, Franklin County and Northern Grand Isle.
Chris Manos, Chittenden North.
Martine LaRocque, Chittenden Central.
Okay, and we have one witness, right? Hunter Thompson? Two. Okay, come on up.
Well, for the record, I am Hunter Thompson. I'm the Director of Telecommunications and Connectivity with the Public Service Department.
And I'm Alex Kelly. I'm Director of Broadband Consulting at a nonprofit consulting firm based in Hartford, Vermont.
And Alex partnered with us to write the 10-year vision. Absolutely. So we might get a couple of slides here. First, we're gonna talk about the I don't think that's the first slide, is it?
Yeah, that's the first slide. I'm gonna just talk through the context and the process, because I know people are interested in that, and then we'll get into a summary of the findings and recommendations, and then obviously open it up for discussion.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, as I'm sure you're all aware, the 10-year plan is done every 3 years in accordance with a process outlined in 30 ESA 202D. And the plan is guided by the goals in 30 VSA 202C. So goals are in 202C and the process follows 202D. And the important context for this 2024 plan is that it was also happening at a moment of significant activity in the telecom sector, driven by the federal government. So I think everyone's probably aware of the BEAD money, part of the Infrastructure Act, and attached to that funding was a requirement to go through an extensive planning process for broadband deployment, which the Public Service Department, the BCBB, was doing kind of simultaneously. So for this plan, we obviously followed 202C and 202D and addressed all the statutory requirements, but we also tried to make sure to put special focus on elements not addressed in the simultaneous BEAD plan that was going on, so as to not duplicate efforts and resources. So a range of qualitative and quantitative research underpinned the plan. A statistically significant survey of landline and cell phone, using a landline and cell phone sampling methodology of about 500 respondents. We did online surveys of businesses, healthcare professionals, public safety professionals. We did interviews with about 60 stakeholders as directed by the Public Service Department and statute. We performed a statewide mobile wireless engineering and coverage analysis, complete with cost estimates and a whole host of recommendations for how to make progress on mobile wireless. And we also did a robust kind of what's called an input-output analysis to look at the workforce in the state and whether it was sufficient to handle the construction in the broadband space and then the maintenance of that infrastructure afterwards. So we're going to get to the findings, but the other thing that I would say is a big component of this plan every time we do it, every time the Public Service Department does it, is a public participation process. And so this process is dictated in part by statute, and I just want to run through some of the things we did to solicit public input. We had 3 public hearings in March of 2024 with joining options to review draft of the plan. We ran ads on WCAX, banner ads to advertise those hearings, and there was a live stream. The hearings included sign language translation, closed captioning. Emails were sent to all interviewees and stakeholder groups. We encouraged them to review the draft plan. There was a dedicated email address set up at the Public Service Department for comment submission. And we received over 50 pages of feedback from the public on the plan from a wide variety of stakeholders. There was also collaborative publicity and distribution of hearings with the AMOs, and Hunter can speak more to that if you want more information. And what all of this resulted in was a significant number of changes between the first draft and the final draft. And so we're very thankful for the robust public participation we got. Anything to add?
I can say that for the public participation sessions, as Alex mentioned, we did both in person and virtual here at 112 State Street. We did 3 of those in the month of March. After the changes to the plan based on public participation, we went around the state to solicit input. We did a hearing in St. Albans, we did a hearing in Randolph, and we did a hearing in Springfield. It all included interpreters and remote options as well as in-person participation. The outreach we did with that, our work with Van and the AMOs, was that we sent all of these to the AMOs and they published it on, I believe, their file share site. We sent out our press releases so they knew that we were having these and they pushed it out to their user community.
Can I ask
Any questions?
Can you just remind me what AMO is?
Oh, I apologize. Access management organization. I have a local cable access management. Things.
Can you give me an example of who this one?
Work media.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. So let's take a look at some of the findings and then recommendations. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So obviously the plan is quite robust. It includes, I think it's 360 pages or something. So this is merely a snapshot, but we tried to curate the most important things and relevant things to the folks in this room and the most notable findings and recommendations coming out of the plan. So and I think the other thing to keep in mind is the plan was completed in June of last year. So I can try to speak to if there's been any changes to the landscape since then. But when you see me noting some of these findings, put yourself back in June of last year.
I apologize that we're all seeing this now. We should have done this in prior to July 1st. We set up a meeting at Dry Talk prior to July 1st, and due to the scheduling confusion, we were unable to get another meeting in and then unable to get a meeting over the summer. So that's why we're all here now, so that we can present this plan to you. Now that everybody's back in session, and we have an opportunity to get together again.
So households with access to 100 meg symmetrical doubled between 2020 and 2023. It's great progress moving in the right direction, and Vermont is on track to pass all on-grid premises by 2029 with infrastructure sufficient to reach 100 megs. Obviously, there has been some disruption at the federal level, and some of the money that we anticipated being was put to this goal back in June of last year may have some changes happening to it. We can't really make any predictions there. Nothing has changed significantly so far, but it's something to keep aware of. But obviously, the point of this is to say that if the BEAD money stays in the form it is, we believe there's sufficient funding to pass all un- and underserved premises in the state. The state also has done a better job than I think any other state in actually mapping and documenting where the un- and underserved premises are, which gives us higher confidence that the state is truly on track, unlike many other states in the union. I mentioned doing an analysis of construction workforce, and interestingly, between 2018 and 2022, the broadband deployment workforce shrank in the state by quite a bit. We can talk about the different reasons for that, but if the state is really going to see $700 million of fiber deployments, some of which are ongoing, some of which will happen over the next 4 years. And then importantly for the maintenance of those networks afterwards, we projected in June that the state would need to grow the workforce by about 750 workers. And we provided recommendations, which you'll see later, for how the state can benchmark, how the state can benchmark whether they're doing a good job in recruiting that workforce and what the extent of that workforce needs to be. Yes, sir.
And how many individuals did we lose when the workforce shrank by 12%?
I will, I have the plan up on my computer. I can go look and try to find that.
Roughly how big is the workforce now? Like 750 new people, is that doubling it or is that 10% growth?
10%,
Thank you.
I think. Better than it, closer to 10% than doubling it, and I'll get you an answer. If I don't get back to it, I can send you an email.
Thank you.
That's a good question, yeah.
We're asking as we go. Yes. Okay, great. 750 workers. Can you give us a sense of what those jobs will be and if they are things, jobs that might be accommodated through like technical education or certification or whatnot?
Yeah, exactly. So in the plan, we looked at the top 12 jobs that are involved in construction, of project construction. So there's 12 job categories using the federal BLS classification system. And the majority of them are absolutely jobs that could be serviced by that type of training. We also note in the plan the ongoing efforts at the BCBB and the state college system, and they're doing the right things. We just recommended a scale of that work that was needed to actually accommodate this significant number of workers. And we also have to keep in mind that New England is a small area and crews are often regional, and so you might get told if whoever you're working for, used to still take jobs all around New England, and so there's going to be competition for these partners across the region as well.
Great. The bulk of these jobs don't require a 4-year college degree.
No. In fact, there's training programs both in the state and regional. Send people, pay for them to be trained, and sometimes it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 14 weeks, depending on what it is. But that's the range for a number of these roles. Yeah, question. Okay. A couple other points just on the fiber broadband expansion. One unresolved issue that was noted by a wide range of stakeholders is the concern about what happens when we harden our electric utilities by burying them in the next 10 to 15 years, which is part of the utility hardening plan. And the thing that people flag is obviously the costs and responsibilities for people who are using utility poles, but not the utilities themselves, is unclear. So who pays for that? Who pays for that in the next 10 to 15 years when that happens? And the business plans of broadband providers expanding in the state today absolutely look that far in advance. The lifetime of fiber on the poles can be anywhere from 20 to 40 years. And so it is a material issue that impacts people who are building their business plans today. And then lastly, at the time of publication of this plan, the Agency of Transportation had stopped assessing zero-cost fees in unserved areas. And we can talk about this a little bit more, but that was, serving rural areas is difficult. There's a reason it hasn't been done before, and any little support that the state can provide in making sure we're building as efficiently as possible is useful. And so we'll see a recommendation based around that when we get to the recommendation section.
Senator Campbell.
Yeah, so are you going to explain this a little bit more when we get there? Because it's not clear how zero cost fees help,
Sure.
if they're not raising any money.
Right, yeah, so you want to explain this to me? We met at extra notes.
So I've written this memo a couple of times, and it is, as I said earlier, that the broadest possible terms, not charging a fee for access to the state right away will allow more money to be reinvested back into the building out of these networks.
Okay, well, but we're not assessing fees now.
Right.
And this point makes as AOT no longer assessing zero cost fees. In other words, AOT might start charging.
They might sell
I-
us.
Sort of a double negative here, I got it,
We're doing
okay.
a study this year.
Yeah.
The study is being done by AOT to assess the impact of charging a fee in the state.
Oh,
Okay.
And at the time, they had not been charging a fee, and then they switched back to charging a fee, and so it's I guess it's an ongoing concern.
All right.
Yes.
Yes, all right.
Good.
And remember,
Next slide, please. So we, as I mentioned before, we took a really deep look at mobile service across the state. One really interesting finding from the surveys, this finding surprised me, the extent to which people were very vocal about this, but 80% of the business owners we surveyed indicated that the mobile wireless coverage is inadequate in Vermont for their business needs. And for those who where mobile wireless is called cell service, so we're talking about cell service here. But when you think about the types of businesses that are all across the state, a lot of them involve transportation, a lot of them involve moving things around or require reaching people, being able to have someone look up on their phone, is this place open while they're on the ski hill, and so a lot of widespread response that lack of mobile broadband impacts businesses in the state. And then out of all residents we surveyed, a clear majority agreed that the state should use public funds to improve mobile wireless coverage. So when we looked at the actual coverage, we found that the speeds that are being provided have increased quite a bit in the past 6 years, and that's due to technology improvements. But the coverage areas themselves saw almost no expansion. So approximately 412 miles of road, we believe do not have mobile broadband from any provider at the moment. Now, mobile broadband is difficult to deploy in the state for a number of reasons, and the path we are recommending and we took is that we showed in this plan that the state can actually make significant progress with deploying 50-foot tall or shorter towers and not the 140-foot towers that are the kind of big ones you see out there. And those 50-foot facilities are not going to efficiently cover the entire state due to the topology, but the state can make good progress closing the first 50% of the gaps with those shorter wireless facilities, and we have recommendations specifically around that. I saw a hand over here.
Representative Bailey.
Yeah.
Yeah, backing up one slide, any idea how much revenue V-Trans lost by giving up the for the right of way fees?
I don't remember a number with I would guarantee the accuracy of, so I think PTMs, we have that number. I remember just from the last session.
Thanks.
Did you ever charge fees?
So,
No, my memory is that fees were not, that they had the power to do the fees, but they had always forgiven them because the public good of getting broadband out was greater, and there was that loophole in the law.
There's an application fee and there's a Broadway fee, and I think there's often get conflated.
Yeah.
I believe that they stopped waiving they stopped not charging the application fee, that they once again started to charge a fee to apply to use the right of way, but they didn't charge a fee for a foot of infrastructure in the right of way. So those do get confusing because they're often conflated, but V-Trans has a much better number than I would have for the revenue, and they are currently conducting a study on exactly how much revenue would be gleaned from charging the in the state right of way. I believe that report is due next year.
Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. Unless anyone has any comments on the mobile side of things. Okay, yes, good. So here's more detail on the engineering analysis. So one of the benefits of the fiber push that's going on is that it should in theory reduce the cost of mobile deployments. So we had a study that was overseen and led by a certified engineer, and using kind of up-to-date cost estimates. We compared covering the remaining gaps in the state with optimally placed 140-foot traditional macro towers, and compared to basically 50-foot facilities, which you can see around the state. Those are very much in use as well. And both of them were, the analysis was done to kind of optimally place them and place them most efficiently in the state. And the results was that, closing the easiest 50% of mobile wireless coverage would actually be even more efficient with just using the smaller wireless facilities. And that's just because they are significantly cheaper to install. But to really cover 100% of or achieve near ubiquitous coverage, you would need to then probably build some of the bigger towers as well. But you could make significant progress that I think people would really feel and notice with, we estimate 98 50-foot towers. No, sorry, 107 50-foot towers at a cost of just over 10 million. Okay. Any comments, questions? Okay. Next slide, please. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about affordability and certainly some things since the plan was published that have been tried in other states, but just to remind you, back in June, when this was written, the Portable Connectivity Program, which was a federal program providing a mobile broadband subsidy, sunsetted. It was not refunded at federal level. There were 24,000 Vermonters that were utilizing that program at a rate of $30 per month off their broadband bill. So as you can imagine, when we reached Vermonters via the survey, a significant number of them talked about affordability challenges. And so we did include a specific recommendation for how, if and how the state could try to replace this service if the federal government didn't step up and do so, which has still been the case. One thing we noted is that in our outreach and stakeholder interviews, as well as surveys, it was almost unanimous that people said both fixed broadband, as in broadband at your house, and mobile broadband are both essential. They're both essential to living in the state, staying connected to services, doing business, and so forth. However, the federal program only covered one service. So when we scoped out what a program just in Vermont could look like, we looked at different things, right? Just replacing the federal program and covering one service, expanding it to cover multiple services, mobile and fixed. And we also looked at different income thresholds and what it would look like to offer it to, 135% of the poverty line or 185% of the poverty line, I believe. And last thing I'll note on this is the healthcare workers that we spoke to in particular were very vocal and strongly noted that mobile coverage in particular is critical for some of the critical populations they serve. Unhoused Vermonters, for example, that is their point of connection to make sure they're getting to appointments and accessing services. Next slide, please. So we did some analysis of public safety issues in the state. Obviously the mobile broadband and the wireline broadband help public safety in many ways, but we want to note a couple other things. While we were making this plan, the Public Safety Communications Task Force was established and was a dedicated effort to understand what it would look like to consolidate public safety answering points in the state. So in trying to be useful to that conversation, which was at the forefront last year, we included a significant analysis of some of the pros and cons, basically taking that approach. And there's a couple of pages in the plan devoted to that. We also wanted to note that, questions, yeah.
Yeah, I think the way you're characterizing that task force is not quite accurate, so I'm wondering if you had a good understanding of what that task force's work is supposed to be.
I'm gonna tag on here.
Yeah, we met with public safety and when we interviewed them in this stuff. They remember reporting back on the what we got at the time.
You met with Commissioner Morrison and her team?
Mhm.
Okay. Because I was on that came out of the committee that I chaired, and so that's not how I would describe that task force at all. So that's an interesting angle, if that's what you were understanding their work to be.
I think I don't think we understand that to be their whole charge, but that was the one piece that we looked at in the plan,
Okay,
as a piece of consolidation.
okay.
Oh, there's other things that they're doing.
Yeah, maybe I'll
So
look at this
intersect that.
specific part of your plan, because, and their work is continuing, I think it's important for you all to coordinate, but I hope that's not all you're getting out of their work, and that's just, and that's not even how I would describe it at all, so.
Continue to coordinate. I was on a meeting with them probably 3 weeks ago.
Okay, good,
Yeah, you know, study or mapping.
thanks.
We have a blockage on this.
Oh,
You have a window over the overlay share screen.
There it goes. Okay, now we can. Okay, let's continue and we can
There's a question
talk
here.
offline on that one.
Rick Bailey?
Yeah, the page before, you said you ran 2 scenarios regarding the cost of a low income program. Do you have the numbers for that?
Yeah, they're in the plan. If off the top of my head, I think the full scenario was 20-something million a year. So it's not, and that's basically replacing the subsidy at the current levels of eligibility, as well as allowing for a subsidy to be applied to mobile service as well. So, that was the high end of eligibility, and then we looked at reducing the eligibility to 135%, which I think overlapped with some existing programs, and that was somewhere in the teens, millions of dollars. I can try to find those specifically for you as well.
I can take those.
Thank you.
So, another just finding that people tend to want to know about is the advancement of FirstNet. So according to the people we interviewed, there's over 50 FirstNet sites that have been deployed in the state. Of course, not all of those are new towers. In fact, most of them are tower upgrades and not new towers. So that certainly is progress on FirstNet deployment. That being said, when we interviewed public safety first responders, only 5% of respondents reported never losing mobile service on the job. So, and then, lastly, we looked at the statewide communication interoperability plan and spoke to stakeholders around that about where progress was happening and where it was not. And they strongly noted that they simply don't have enough funding from various sources to implement all that. That plan will need to be readdressed, I think, by statute anyways pretty soon, because it has to be updated every so often. And so obviously closer coordination on what the plan is and how it's going to be funded is going to be essential. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind. And then the last thing we did, at the request of the JITOC committee, among others, is we did an analysis of the statutes that govern telecom in the state. And see some specific recommendations on that when we get to the recommendation section, but there were issues of definitions and deployment goals that were not cohesive across statutes. We want to flag that the statutorily mandated end date for the BCBB is likely to happen before all the program activities will occur. And in fact, I would say, given the delays that we're seeing out of the federal government, that is even more true now than it was in June. And we noted quite a number of places where statutory goals, some of which are 40 years old or almost 40 years old, contain overlapping and non-specific language, and it's certainly due for modernization. Okay, moving on to the recommendations. Okay, so these should sound familiar and kind of flow from the findings that we've discussed, but please correct me if you have any questions. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we understand that AOT is doing an analysis of their fees or the fee waivers. It's in Hunter's words, it's the position of the department that the agency of transportation should make it as easy as possible to deploy broadband until we get to universal 100/100 coverage. So also in the wireline deployment bucket, as in the tribal broadband deployment bucket, we appreciate the efforts that are being made at the state college level in collaboration with the BCG and others to train people to meet the workforce needs. And as I mentioned, we are recommending that they just be very careful to scale that to the sufficient level so that we don't have workforce shortages that are delaying deployment and causing increased costs. And then lastly, given the sensitivity to the business plans of the ISPs that are deploying right now, to the issue of burying utilities in 10 to 15 years, we do think that there needs to be a pretty robust study that pulls in utility owners, public service department, and ISPs to kind of figure this out and to look at the risks and the exposure to business plans that actions taken to bury utilities will have. Yes.
Chair calls on me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But the whole issue of burying lines, I know that Green Mountain Power has a plan to do it. Is it possible to do it in coordination so it's less costly? And is that kind of work happening?
So I think that's one of the suggestions in the plan. It's hard to kind of consolidate a 300-page plan into a couple of talking points that we can fit in. But in that section of the plan, we recommend that Green Mountain Power work in conjunction with the providers so that as they're burying conduit, extra conduit is installed, and that it is for use to bury the fiber to try to harden the network infrastructure.
Seems like it would be a lost opportunity if
Absolutely.
they go through the state and bury all the stuff in their area,
We
and then you have to follow and bury all the other stuff.
Yeah.
The giant machine that Green Mountain Power actually managed to get to do this work, and it looks like a rolling apartment basically. And the number of conduits it can bury at once and the various sizes that it can use, it's very impressive. And that's definitely one of the recommendations. The power companies work with the telecom providers to do the hardening at once to save money and to make it so that we're not left, so that telecom isn't left on the poles, as we said earlier, and the electric is underground, because then it needs to, well, who's gonna do the tree maintenance? The electric company no longer needs to trim trees because they now have their power buried, so now it's on the telecom to do the tree trimming.
Right, and during a storm, you might have electric, but you wouldn't have phone or cable or internet or whatever.
Right, but coming up with a plan for who pays for all the burial will be important, because I don't think there's alignment around that right now.
That's a shock.
Okay, let's, we are at risk of running out of time, so I would say let's keep keep going and I'll try to be more efficient. So we think that, you know, if the state wants to make meaningful progress on expanding cell service, mobile wireless, we do think that the small wireless facilities route is gonna have to be used just because it will be a little bit easier at least to get through siting processes and everything that goes along with that. We think the right approach is to pilot what we're calling a small facilities grant, mobile wireless grant program to test this approach and understand the efficiency with which the state can encourage mobile wireless deployments while preserving the landscape aesthetic by using, again, 50-foot towers or less. And so we think that's a good amount of resources to put to this to gain some meaningful experience in running a grant program like this, make some meaningful progress, and then iterating it to get the rest of the deployments done. Yeah.
Representative Morrow, thanks.
That money in the governor's budget?
It is not. It was requested. Okay, and then the other recommendation related to this is we made a number of recommendations to the state's data collection practices on mobile broadband to strengthen our understanding of where new deployments need to be in order to optimize them and obviously be as efficient as possible. We recommend that the Public Service Department repeat the mobile broadband drive test that was done in 2022. We provided some input into ways to strengthen it. And we also are recommending that there's some type of crowdsource practice that could be enabled to get the roads that aren't able to be tested via the state. And to also improve the state's data collection abilities, we are recommending that the state requests that 48 permit recipients notify Public Service Department when the tower they permitted is actually built. Right now, they don't have to know, the state knows when they receive a permit, but not when that work was done.
So for reference, since last June, we've started the 2024 drive test. We have driven 6,000 miles so far. We're working on getting that map and getting the comparison between the 2022 results and the 2024 results online. And we completed a map of all of the towers that we know of through the 248A process currently. And as mentioned, it is cumbersome to go and actually go on Google Earth or even have to do a drive to see if the tower is actually there to figure out if what was applied for was built. So it would be a great benefit to get some sort of feedback.
Representative Sibilia.
I heard you say the towers that we know of.
Yeah, so I say because 248A is only one mechanism to get a cell tower put up. You can also use Act 250.
I'm sorry?
Act 250. So 248A, I believe, was created so that Act 250 did not need to be gone through, and that it offered a centralized location to get a cell tower. So we have purview of the towers through to 248A process. I will say I have found one from about 20 years ago that I was asked about, and I couldn't find the permit for. And I got hold of the provider and they said we went to Act 250. Fair enough.
Is it possible to find out if there are additional Act 250 permitted towers?
Possible.
Next slide, please. So, to really robustly ensure affordability for Vermont residents with financial need for both wireline and wireless service, we came up with a series of recommendations and benchmarks for doing that. Here is just one example, although as mentioned, there's a chart with different flavors of this depending on the ability to allocate funds. But we believe that the definition of affordable, so what would affordable mean, should be considered 2% of monthly income for both fixed and mobile broadband together. As in, your cell phone bill and your broadband bill should not exceed 2% of your monthly income. Using that threshold, the state would need to provide a subsidy of $67 a month to low-income Vermonters for those two types of subscriptions together in order to ensure that people, low-income residents, could have affordable coverage. Of course, there are different ways to do this depending on the resources the state has available. But we also feel very strongly, or we made a strong recommendation that particularly due to the challenges that unhoused Vermonters have in accessing services and healthcare, that there could be a separate program that provided fully subsidized mobile devices and mobile subscriptions to unhoused Vermonters to ensure continuous access to care and services.
Representative Morrow.
Just curious, given that there's some plans out there in the private sector, for instance, Xfinity has a 1495 plan right now, all inclusive of 75 megabits a second. Might be a bill out there to expand this kind of thing. Why don't we rely on our private sector partners to offer low-cost options instead of costing the taxpayers $20 million plus staff time to administer this program?
So this was written back in June prior to any bills which have been introduced this section, just for reference. What we were looking at was a replacement for the ACP program, the Affordable Connectivity Program, and that's kind of what we based our numbers on, and we based the service level on the standard service tier as opposed to the lower service tier that are offered by the income sensitive programs.
That's 100.
Right, yeah.
And I think, any ISP that's big enough to be able to afford to offer service at that discount it's great. It only helps the affordability conversation. I think what we found in surveys is that there were a significant number of people who theoretically qualified for a service like that, but couldn't sign up or were denied coverage due to back debts or any number of other challenges. So I agree, and this is me speaking, not the department. I think private industry has to be a part of it, and we should figure out how to leverage what they're offering as best as possible. I also know that in the New York bill, for example, they've exempted providers with under 20,000 subscribers from the low cost provisions, and I also think that is important, and the bill couldn't have worked without that. The way that utility business models work, the smaller scale really matters. So not having that scale means the impact is much greater for these types of programs. So.
Sure.
Okay, let's move on. Okay. Without getting too much into it, given especially the senator's notes about what the task force is doing. Right, we provided the analysis of what PSAP consolidation in Vermont could look like and the pros and cons of that to inform the dialogue and discussion around that. So please make use of that and let us know if there are any questions. And then the two other primary recommendations on emergency communications are to do that coordination through the renewal of the SCIP plan to make sure that when federal grants are unavailable, there's sufficient funding to actually execute on the goals of that plan. And then lastly, the state has an opportunity through the grant making it's doing in other areas of telecom to ensure that resiliency measures are built into new deployment. There's significant detail in the plan about what that actually means, and we're certainly hoping that the grant processes incorporate as much of that as they can.
I think that one's important to reiterate, especially after the past 2 years where we've had the 100-year flood twice back, that any new telecom deployments really should be looking at making sure that they meet resiliency standards, especially in light of climate change and the fact that it's not going to get better. We're not going to go back to how the climate was 10 years ago in the state of Vermont, where if we get a flood, it's something common. This is a trend. I remember talking with a climate scientist from UVM who said that the expectation is that we're gonna get roughly the same amount of rainfall in a much shorter amount of time. So we're gonna go through series of drought followed by periods of intense storm, and it's gonna erode the topsoil, and we're gonna have to start dealing with that. So really focusing on the fact that anything that's coming out or being installed now needs to address the climate as it's gonna be in 50 years as opposed to the climate as it was 50 years ago was of the utmost importance. That's just some speech and part of my rant.
Next slide, please. This is the last recommendation slide, so we can pull the deck down after this, but we also went through and detailed, whoever is going to take on modernizing the telecom statutes. We put in notes on where we think attention needs to be paid to make it align with current state strategies. So, there are various statutory goals and processes outlined in 202C, D that are not in alignment with Act 71 as well as it could be. We do believe that the BCBB sunset date needs to be extended to allow them to provide adequate oversight of the BEAD deployments, not only during the process of building, but also after that, where there's compliance reporting that needs to be done. And then we put a lot of ink to looking at how statutory goals could be modernized. There's, as we mentioned, 10 statutory goals regarding telecom. There's a whole host of them that kind of overlap in slightly nebulous ways, and should be looked at and with fresh set of eyes, understanding the landscape today.
I sent a 3-page list to my boss to look at in terms of statute and things that I think should be modified, changed, or just noted, and especially the overlap between Act 71 and what we currently have in statute. I think statute still requires that the department be the go-to for broadband planning, for like wire and broadband planning. We continually say we think Act 71 made it pretty clear that the Vermont Community Broadband Board is who it's gone to for wire and fiber to the premises planning. So there's stuff like that. I'm not sure what that is, but I did get that together just so you know, and set it up to change, see what happens. Yes,
That's it?
I think I heard our slide deck. I apologize.
We got one question.
Did you provide us with the full report? I'm sure it's on your website somewhere, but it's not on our website, so.
It's on our website. I will absolutely send a link or provide it.
If you send it to Charlotte,
Yeah.
we'll,
We'll get it. Maybe pass it on. Oh, I didn't even think of that. Maybe we put it out there in June.
okay. Thank you. Senate Finance is 10 minutes behind schedule, so we don't want to cut off Senator Lewitt's presentation. So, which you probably would be if we did. So, as fast as you can, realizing that there will probably be a few detours and we have to wait for Charlotte. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. Thank you. Right. Yeah.
Oh, we don't do that.
Yeah, I can go up.